had a confrontation with a young man who said, School of Architecture shut down, you can't go in. And I said, look, I'm not trying to break the strike. I'm just, I've got a social purpose here. This is not about business as usual, but you guys are supposed to be advocating for social justice and equality, and that's exactly what I'm here about. So I'm going in the building, and we can do this the hard way or the easy way.
Welcome to the SGV Master Key, a show where you will hear personal stories of triumph over failures and how others successfully navigated the unique landscape that is the San Gabriel Valley. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we have chosen the San Gabriel Valley for our home or businesses or both. We believe it is the people and small businesses that make this community great, and we love to share their stories with you. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at sgvmasterkey.com. Here are the hosts for the show, Russell Mono and Scott Warmoth.
All right, welcome back to another episode. Thank you for tuning in to the SGV Master Key. We always appreciate you spending this time with us, and we hope to bring you another interesting story with another guest. And today, a lot of our guests have ties or have mentioned part of their SGV3 Pasadena, right? Like it's very common that they would mention Old Pasadena, the Rose Bowl, something like that, right? And, you and I both live in Pasadena, and it's a really special place for us, right?
Pasadena is, to me, just a real gem. It's a place, one of the finest cities in Southern California. But more than that, it stands up as a global city. You look at the world-class institutions that are here, and you just are impressed, And I've lived here 27, 28 years, and I'm still just in awe of just the great institutions that are here, and the people and the culture of Pasadena.
Right. I've been a resident for 6 years, but I do remember coming, to Colorado with my brother, and maybe this was in the mid to late 90s, and I remember a very different feeling coming to that area of Pasadena versus what I see now. And it's, now it's a place where people look forward to going, on a Friday night, Saturday night, just walking around Old Town, and it means a lot to various people. Yeah,
well, it's changed a lot in the time I've lived here, and our guest today has probably as much to do with that as anyone does. But it'll be interesting to talk about some of these changes that we've seen, different type of city that Pasadena is evolving into and has evolved into in the recent past. Sure. So let me go ahead and move forward with introducing our guest. He's the former mayor of Pasadena, Terry Tornek, and let me give you a little bit of background about him. He was born and raised in Brooklyn, so he gets 1 million points for that because every great person I've ever known was born and raised in Brooklyn. No finer place to come from. A graduate of Princeton University and Columbia University School of Urban Planning. So you get some points there because that's my daughter's alma mater. And he was elected mayor in 2015. He served as a councilman and as, let me put on my glasses here, was on the Planning Commission and the Design Commission for Pasadena, elected in 2009 as a Pasadena City Councilman. So welcome, Terry Tornek. Thank you for coming.
Delighted to be with you.
Yeah.
So you obviously have a connection to the San Gabriel Valley and Pasadena, but how did you come here? What is your story of arriving here?
My wife directed and orchestrated that. We were living in Springfield, Massachusetts, and our 3 kids were born there, and I was planning director in the city of Springfield, and then I moved into private business. But she was becoming increasingly disaffected with New England winters, and her family had moved to Southern California, her parents and her sister. And so she was anxious to leave New England My family was in Florida, and so I was anxious to move there and join them, and she loathes Florida, with some justification, I think. And so she was looking at one of my planning journals and discovered that the city of Pasadena was looking for a planning director. She said, "Why don't you apply for this?" I said, "Okay." And here we are. 35 years later, she just decided that California would be a better environment for raising our family and being near her folks. And frankly, we made an exploratory trip out here because I wasn't really familiar with Southern California. And I was so taken by the energy, the feeling of possibility here, that I thought it would be a really good fit. And when I came to Pasadena for my interview, I had an immediate affinity for the place. I recognized that as an Easterner with a person who is interested in the built environment and that sort of thing, that there was a real sense of place here, because I had job opportunities in Orange County and in Northern California, but I really felt an immediate connection to Pasadena.
I think that makes sense for, as you say, someone from the East Coast. It has a lot of the sort of traditions and culture that you would see in an eastern city. It's less Los Angeles to me than it is Midwest or East Coast.
No question. And I think it has a sense of self. And the reason I got hired was because there had been a huge battle over Old Pasadena, the future of Old Pasadena. We never call it Old Town, by the way.
Scott had mentioned that in a previous episode. He corrected somebody.
Old Town is Monrovia or someplace.
Right. Yes.
Old Pasadena is somewhat unique, and so that's okay. You got to pass once. But they had Pasadena Heritage, which had been a newly formed organization, had just fought City Hall's plan to scrape Old Pasadena, to demolish it, and build some suburban-style office park. And so there was this feeling of achievement, and the fact that people had risen up and fought City Hall successfully and recognized that there was value in the existing buildings there and the infrastructure. And they were looking for a person who had some background in historic preservation, revitalization, and that's what I had been working on. I mean, that had been my career to that point. And so I owe my arrival here and being hired to the fact that preservation had become a powerful force in Pasadena. And so I was hired really to work on Old Pasadena. That was my, that was what set me apart from other candidates, I guess.
And I may be wrong, you could correct me if so, but I have the feeling that this sense of history and heritage is still a very strong part of Pasadena and still a very powerful mover in the city.
I think that's absolutely true. And unhappily, I think what's happened is it's become conflated a little bit with a resistance to change. It's not the same thing. At least not in my mind. You can have a reverence for valuable pieces of the past and maintaining certain values and some aspects of the built environment, but still recognize that cities must change and grow and evolve because they're like living things. You can't just sort of freeze them in amber. And unhappily, I think to a certain extent, there's been an increasing number of voices who want to keep things exactly as they have been, as they are, and are resistant to any kind of change. And some of them may wave the banner of preservation, but I make a clear distinction between them. And I think that for a city to be vibrant and successful, it has to be willing to accommodate change and even anticipate change, not be totally resistant to change. And I think it would be too bad if those two ideas got so confused in people's minds that the city became unwilling to accommodate any changes at all.
I'd like to go back to, I think, is it 1987, 35 years ago when you first arrived here?
No, 82 actually.
82. Okay. So what was Pasadena like then? I have no recollection of what Pasadena looked like then.
Oh, I think it was recognizable to someone who arrived today. I think the critical components have been in place for a long time. The institutions that Scott mentioned in terms of, the world-class institutions, Caltech, the Art Center College of Design, the Fuller Theological Seminary, these places, PCC, all of that was in place. But the city was different in terms of its demographics and in terms of its expectations, I think. Just before I got here, and part of the reason that people had contemplated tearing Old Pasadena down, the city had really come on hard times. There was not significant investment here. It was viewed as, at least by the development community, as sort of a backwater, very conservative. And people would, when I first got here, people who I met from the West Side would say, "Oh my God, Pasadena! I haven't been there in fill in the blank number of years. There's no reason to go to Pasadena." So it wasn't a healthy sort of economic circumstance. The virtue of Old Pasadena is that there was an opportunity to build in a creative way on what was already in place by bringing some different tools to play, redevelopment and parking bonds and that sort of thing that hadn't been used in a creative way. And by virtue of beginning to do that kind of redevelopment in Old Pasadena and turning it from a kind of a worn out place into a more vibrant and emerging place, which people were rediscovering, it really helped to change the outlook on what Pasadena was about. And there's nothing that attracts investment like it's a herd mentality. And when people start to see other people investing money someplace, they want to get on that train, before it pulls too far from the station. And so there started to be, people began to recognize that Pasadena was a real opportunity. The 210 freeway had only been recently completed and was being extended further east. The Gold Line was just being discussed and then put into place. And so there was some important regional infrastructure that was being put in place that made Pasadena really sort of enhanced its place in the regional marketplace of cities. And so that all of the things, the bones were all here, but things began to accelerate. Pasadena became a more attractive environment. Lots of new housing, multifamily housing started to get built. Prices started to go up at a significant rate. The demographics changed. The African American community shrunk dramatically in the time since I arrived in 1982. And so the place really began to change both economically and also demographically.
So you're obviously very involved and I would say passionate based on some of the videos I've seen about you in city planning, and you went to school for this. But can you go back before that? What were the things in your life that even made that an interest to you?
Well, it is interesting. When I was at Princeton, I was in the School for Public and International Affairs. It used to be called the Woodrow Wilson School, but now Woodrow Wilson turns out to have been a bad guy, so they dropped Woodrow Wilson. But the School for Public and International Affairs, and I had a keen interest. My major interest at that point, what I wrote my senior thesis on, was on labor unions, particularly the Teamster Union and its political arm, which is called Drive, still exists. And I got a grant to travel around the country and study that. And then, so it wasn't clear to me, and Maria and I got married in the year that we graduated from college, and we were going to go to the Peace Corps. But Vietnam intervened in those plans, and instead I joined the Army and met my military obligation. And when I came out of the Army, there was a job fair that the federal government, I was interested in public service. Princeton makes a very big point, did then and still does today, of instilling a feeling of public service as a kind of a touchstone for people who have ability and have the opportunity to serve. And so I was really interested in going to work in government. And so the feds had this job fair in Washington, and Maria and I went down, and all the agencies were represented. They were all hiring. They all had programs, to entice recent college graduates and veterans to join. And the three that were of interest to me were the National Labor Relations Board, because of my exposure in my thesis project, the CIA, and HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So the NLRB was of interest. CIA wanted me as a field operative, and I didn't want any part of that. And the fact that I was married made me less attractive to them for that job. But HUD really sounded like a good fit. And so I went to work for HUD in New York City, and really began to develop an interest in all things urban as a result of that experience, and realized after about a year that I really needed more technical skills to be effective. And Columbia had a great program in the School of Architecture, School of Urban Planning. And so I got a free ride, and I went to get a master's degree in urban planning, and Maria was teaching on the Lower East Side. And we were New Yorkers, so it was not a strange environment for us. And so that's what really kind of instilled professional interest in urban planning.
It sounds like that might have been in about the 60s.
Yeah, that was, I graduated from Columbia in 71.
Okay. So you were there during the big
oh, yeah.
protests. And
well, not only was I there, but I was a veteran, and I had a slightly different take on some of what was going on there.
That's right.
So it was a very...
I mean, that was a complete shutdown of the school.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I can remember one experience where I was working with a tenant group in Manhattan Valley, which is a portion of central Harlem. And I was working on a program to try to help tenants become owners. Some of these buildings that landlords were walking away from and couldn't maintain. And I had a big tenant meeting, and I needed to, this shows you how long ago it was, I needed to mimeograph. Some of your listeners may not know what that is.
So can you explain? Yeah.
An early form of reproducing copies. That involved ink and a drum, and I had to run off all these copies for the meeting. And there was I had a confrontation with a young man who said, School of Architecture shut down, you can't go in. And I said, look, I'm not trying to break the strike. I'm just, I've got a social purpose here. This is not about business as usual, but you guys are supposed to be advocating for social justice and equality, and that's exactly what I'm here about. So I'm going in the building, and we can do this the hard way or the easy way, because I was still in a kind of a semi-military mode, and he recognized, he consulted with his organizers,
handlers.
And they deemed that it was an appropriate exception to make, and I was able to make the copies and have my meeting.
That was a crazy time of life, but we've seen that repeat itself many times since, I suppose. But interesting, Columbia always has had kind of this tenuous relationship with its surrounding in terms of being how it was perceived by residents of Harlem.
Oh,
for instance.
Columbia was completely insensitive and oblivious.
Yeah.
I served as the student trustee on the School of Architecture. There was this whole experience of wanting to engage students in the governance of the university. And so I was elected as the student representative to the Board of Trustees, and there was a proposal to build this new athletic facility, a new gym, which was going to demolish. Columbia owned a bunch of housing nearby. And
right down Morningside Park there.
All over the place.
Yeah.
And they were going to demolish hundreds of units of housing for low-income people to build this gym. And the neighborhood, pushed back, as you can imagine. And I can remember going to meetings in my role as a student trustee and saying, "Are you guys kidding? I mean, are you paying any attention at all?" And they said, "Well, we're going to let the neighborhood use it on certain nights of the week." Said,
well, it's just to give some perspective. Maybe Russell hasn't been there, but this big elite university, Columbia University, sits up, overlooking Harlem. And so you've got, this perception, and the setting is just very incongruous, I guess, that doesn't fit in well, because, the neighbors are not students, they're actually,
But with all due respect, Scott, it's a much broader issue than that. In my experience, and it's happened here in Pasadena over and over again, institutions are typically bad neighbors. Institutions are very often bad neighbors. They are caught up in their own mission. And it's true whether it's a university or whether it's a hospital or almost any kind of institution is so bound up in its mission statement that it ignores the fact that there are people that live around it. I mean, later in life, when I worked for an architectural company that did a lot of hospital work, hospitals which were often in the middle of a residential neighborhood, would want to do some expansion project, put up a 7-story parking structure with a blank wall facing, a residential neighborhood, and not understand for a moment why there'd be objection to it. And the response would be, well, we're saving lives here. And it's true.
Well, they have their own justification.
They have an internal justification. They're completely inward thinking. They don't think of themselves as being neighbors to the poor guy who lives across the street. And it's the same. Look, Caltech had a history of pushing and shoving with its surrounding neighbors. They have become so forward-thinking. I don't take credit for this, but I've been engaged in some of this process. In terms of when they plan a project, one of the first things they think about, without any prodding from any city official, is what will the neighborhood impacts be? How are we thinking about this project? If there are going to be externalities, how can we mitigate them so it doesn't have an adverse effect on the neighborhood? And some institutions are much better at that than others. I'm not going to rank everybody in Pasadena.
Right, yeah, don't name names.
But that's a sort of an institutional imperative. Churches, same thing. I mean, it's...
So you just see that repeatedly.
Over and over again. Columbia was my first experience, but certainly not my last.
Right.
Only learning of this now about Caltech and in my own driving by and seeing the improvements that they do, it's quite obvious, right, that they really take into account the neighborhood around them.
Wasn't always true.
Because I think in their architecture, it sort of looks, I think on Del Mar, they had a new building put up, and the architecture is modern. I would say it's very modern.
Oh, it's probably the Frank...
The Chen Neuroscience Center. Spectacular, with a copper cladding.
Yes. But I think only 2 stories still, right? And so like you drive by and you can notice it, but it's not overwhelming. Like it doesn't dominate the street.
Oh yeah, Caltech doesn't dominate, does it? It's pretty...
The real point is not just the architecture of the individual structure. The point is that there was a period in the history of Caltech where they began to gobble the neighborhood. They were buying homes on Arden Road. They were really, and we reached a point with them where we kind of said, look, you got a campus, it's pretty well defined. Whatever you need to do, try to accommodate it within the boundaries of the campus. And the city will cooperate with you, and the neighborhood will cooperate with you in terms of allowing new development, recognizing that you need... After all, the school is not expanding. It's not a matter of them admitting thousands of new students. The student body stays the same. They only have 1,000 undergraduates at Caltech. 1,000. World-class school. Yeah. About 2,000 graduate students. But the point is, because of evolving, this is an illustrative example of what I was talking about in terms of change. Because of evolving technology, because of having to compete with other world-class institutions like MIT, and everywhere, Harvard, if they want to get a team researcher, they have to be able to provide very modern and competitive lab space for that researcher and his or her team. And they can't do that in a 1930s building. They've got to build a brand new state-of-the-art. And that Chen building that you were referencing, Russell, on Del Mar and Wilson, maybe not within my lifetime, but within yours, that's the place. You'll see a byline in a newspaper, if they still have them, or whatever the equivalent is, that says that the key research unlocking the mysteries of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all the dreaded, brain-related infirmities that we suffer from as a society, the resolution of that is going to come from that building on the Caltech campus. I'm convinced of it.
And, that is just so incredibly fascinating. But it's like that for a number of things about Pasadena. I'm just in awe of how many times I will read of something that, came from Pasadena, was, or a resident of Pasadena was, a whatever, a founder, a creator, a discoverer.
And yet, I think the most remarkable for me, as somebody who's been deeply engaged in all things Pasadena for a long time, the most remarkable thing, the thing I reference all the time when I'm talking about Pasadena, outside of Pasadena, is not the world-class institutions like Caltech or the Parade or the Rose Bowl or the architectural, Old Pasadena or the neighborhoods. The thing that I find most remarkable about this town is the volunteerism. The number of organizations that the city has. There are over 1,100 nonprofit organizations, 1,100 in Pasadena. And on a per capita basis, I'm sure it's the highest number in the world, maybe outside of Washington, because D.C. that's a little bit distorted.
Right.
But as a community, the number of hours devoted, the number of organizations that exist, the amount of money that people contribute is unequaled anywhere. And that spirit of giving, that volunteerism and willingness to help people in need is unequaled. And that's really, in a lot of ways, what sets the city apart, not all this other good stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, that could very well be. So you have connections to the two greatest cities in the world. And I just need to know, I used to live in New York City. My daughter lives there. Why is it that every great person you ever read about came from Brooklyn?
Well, I don't know if they came from Brooklyn. Some of them have at least passed through, Brooklyn. Yesterday was Jackie Robinson's day, and Jackie, of course, grew up in Pasadena. Yeah. But Maria and I grew up watching him play for the Dodgers. Yeah, in Brooklyn. Maria lived blocks from Ebbets Field.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, Brooklyn, and it amuses me now because Brooklyn has become this chic place.
Oh, yeah, right.
And my peers all have adult children, who are working in the city, working in New York City, and living in Brooklyn. And before they were living in Brooklyn because they couldn't afford Manhattan, and so Brooklyn was sort of the next closest place.
Yeah.
Now they're choosing to live in Brooklyn because it's way up on the cool, scale.
And those neighborhoods that you would never expect to have become the cool neighborhoods.
When we went back to Williamsburg last, right. I mean, we walked over the bridge from the Lower East Side. We went to visit the school that Maria taught at on the Lower East Side at Suffolk and Rivington Street, PS 160.
Oh, yeah.
And then we walked over the bridge, not the Brooklyn Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge. Uh-huh. People know about the Brooklyn Bridge. They don't even know there's a Williamsburg Bridge. So you can walk from the Lower East Side, Manhattan, to Williamsburg in Brooklyn. And part of Williamsburg, on one side of the bridge, is still an Orthodox Jewish community, guys with the black hats.
Yeah, right.
And the other side is this sort of hip. But the architecture is terrible. It's really crummy.
Is it?
Oh, my gosh. I mean, unlike Old Pasadena, there's very little there of any value.
But
and yet it's become an ultra cool place.
Well, just I think because it's so close and convenient to Manhattan.
There's no question.
But there's the other.
It really makes me laugh just the same. I mean,
yeah, but Park Slope.
Well, I was going to say because there are other parts of Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's classically
with the
beautiful.
brownstones.
Yeah,
Maria has a good friend that she went to elementary school with, who has a brownstone that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That he's owned since the '60s. It wasn't worth a lot then when everybody thought it's time to bail on New York, including us.
Yeah.
And now is worth $1 jillion.
Oh yeah.
But but architecturally, that block, all those brownstones are really fabulous.
Well, Terry, we ask each guest to bring an item of significance with them, and you have chosen to bring a picture with you, and we'll have this on the video portion of the show. But this picture, I'm looking at it right now, and it's a picture of a group of people standing with a flag. And could you describe it for the listener?
Sure. This is we have a practice with our grandchildren when they get to be 13. They have what they call a bar, a bat mitzvah. They become adults in the Jewish community, and they're asked to prepare for that event by undertaking additional study. And they've got Tuesday school and Sunday school, and it's always been my idea that it would be important for them to understand that we're asking them to give it some context, why they're being asked to endure all this extra work when they'd much rather be doing something else. And so the most direct way I could think of doing that is to actually take them to Israel and show them, and in a tangible way, what their heritage is about and what the history of the Jewish people is about. And so we've done that with our children and with our grandchildren, and we've got 7 grandchildren, and the youngest is only 7. And so it occurred to me as time wears on that it might be challenging. We couldn't be confident that we'd be able to deliver on that expectation, in the future. And so I said, while we have the opportunity, let's take everybody at once. And so we got our 3 children and their spouses, 6 of our 7 grandchildren, and a nephew that was along for the ride with his wife. And we all went to Israel. We had a guide and a bus. I laid out an itinerary because I'm familiar with the place. And the photograph I brought, this was in March of 2018, is at the Western Wall in the Old City in Jerusalem, not Old Town Jerusalem. and we all went to the wall, and we had a phenomenal trip. We have sons-in-law who are Presbyterian, and so we had some Christian content in the tour. We went to the Sea of Galilee, and we went to the Jordan River, and there was a baptism site, and because Israel is a place that really helps you to put things in perspective temporally, in terms of understanding what an ancient civilization is about, but also is important to understand in terms of the controversies and the challenges that people are confronting today. So for a whole variety of reasons, I mean, some people take family cruises to the Caribbean or to Mexico or someplace, but I think to have it be a learning experience as well as a family experience is an unbelievable opportunity. And so we were blessed to be able to do that. And it really was a memorable trip. The reason I brought that in the context of your show is because my family, my wife and I have been married for 54 years, and my family that we're blessed to have all within spoiling distance, they all live in Southern California, is such a critical part of my life and what matters to me. I mean, we can talk about Pasadena all day long, but it's really about the family and the ability to interact with them that really is the driver for me and what I'm proudest of and what I get the most satisfaction from.
Well, congratulations on the marriage and for this photo. That represents 2 things that I'm very passionate about. Is I hope to have a long-lasting and loving marriage, and in my later years to have the love of kids and grandkids. Be surrounded by them, and those are things that I really admire. That it takes a lot to hold family together like that. And this kind of trip, I can just feel what that might have been like. To bring generations together to something so important. You recently celebrated Passover. This is for my own curiosity. So what does that mean to you and your family?
Well, Passover is the biggest deal of the year. Passover and Thanksgiving are the two family things that we think the most of, obviously, and not obviously, but in our circumstance. We had a circumstance as our kids grew. My strategy was always to move to a smaller house so they couldn't come back. And it worked like a charm. And so my kids are all happily married. They've got stable relationships. My son has been married more than 20 years now, which is hard to believe. But we didn't anticipate. We live in a little bungalow now, south of California, in Madison Heights, and the dining room isn't big enough. Mm-hmm. And so I had the most costly per square foot addition in history just to make the dining room big enough for Passover and for Thanksgiving. So the last two Passovers we've had to do on Zoom.
Oh.
And we really were torn this time because almost everybody in the family's been vaxxed up. But we decided as a matter of prudence and good practice to still do it by Zoom. And everybody participated. And what was great is that we were able to include part of the family that ordinarily wouldn't have been here. So my brother, who lives in Miami, my nephew, who lives in Wilmington, Delaware, and my other nephew, who lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, we were all Zooming, as well as the Southern California contingent that would ordinarily, they're in that picture. And what we've decided is that next year, God willing, if things are okay and we're able to restore the Seder in our home, we're still going to include the geographically dispersed people, and we're still going to do a hybrid Seder with the in-person group and then the geographically separated group, because it was so much fun. Well, so we really turned it into kind of a plus.
Well, it's a good story. It kind of illustrates what Pasadena is. You've got the traditional, but you supplement it with the new technology, new ideas, and it actually makes a richer environment.
It was great. It really was great. It's just the singing doesn't work. The singing doesn't work with everybody at once. The lag creates it. But even that we got used to. It's just sort of funny.
So for the listening audience, can you just describe what is a Seder?
Well, the Seder is the ceremonial meal, the first night of Passover, which commemorates the freeing of the Israelites from hundreds of years of oppression in Egypt, slavery. And what we do, the important part of the Seder is there's a plate, a Seder plate, which has certain ceremonial food items. And with Jews, it's always about eating, so there are a lot of cultures like that. But each item has a story, has symbolic value, which is explained. And then the youngest members of the in attendance ask questions about what Passover is about, and then the older people, the rest of the ceremonial meal is devoted to explaining what the things are about, the 10 plagues that people know about, and the tyranny and the oppression. The important thing is, the vital thing, and what makes it, I think, such a meaningful holiday and why it's my favorite, is that it's so current. It's something that happened a couple of thousand years ago, and yet it's so relevant. This whole idea of freedom from oppression is so pertinent. And so at our Seder, we've introduced readings from Dr. King, and it's very current in terms of understanding why it's still a meaningful holiday, not some ancient ceremony from long ago and far away. And the important thing is, and the rabbis have instructed us, that when you tell the story, you tell it because it's when we came out of Egypt, us here today, not those people way back then, that this is something that is meaningful and current for this generation. And the kids love it because it's loaded with ceremonial stuff, and we have masks. We have plague masks, which each plague has a mask with lice on it and frogs and blood, and so it's very kind of Halloweeny almost in terms of that kind of thing. But it works very well. And I can remember the Seders at my grandparents' house. And we had uncles that were always impatient to just get on with the meal. And we have to go through all this stuff. And then we had others that took the ceremony, very seriously. And so I think since I've been running the Seder, I try to treat it respectfully, but recognize that for a 6 or a 7-year-old kid, there's a limit to what the attention span is, and even for some adults. And so I try to edit the ceremony in a way that makes it plausible for all age groups.
Well, this is something that I'm very interested in. And, just recently I saw a program where some professor or historian was saying that they can trace the Passover celebration, back thousands of years, and it'd be very hard to convince, all these people to do something like this if it actually had not happened for them. But I'm interested in going back again to your vision and your ability to see change in this larger scale. But let's take a quick break and we'll come back to that.
The legal process can be intimidating. You don't know where to start and you're unsure of what to expect. The attorneys and staff at the law offices of Scott Wormuth have been serving the San Gabriel Valley for over 35 years, helping people just like you navigate through the legal process and ensuring you're treated fairly. You can find them at law888.com or call 626-282-6868. That's 626-282-6868.
All right, we're back with Terry Tornek. Before the break, I was mentioning I'm interested in knowing what it takes to see beyond, to see what it will take to move a city or in the scale that I just can't, because I work with people and individuals and even teams, and I can very clearly see where this person is today and where they can be and how to get them there. And the same thing with a group of people. But when I try to put myself into what it would take to look at a large scale, like a city, I just can't do it. I'm interested in, what does that look like, and what is needed for that?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that share the limitations you've derived, and unfortunately, a lot of them are elected. But I think that it is a challenge. You have to be comfortable with the idea, I think, that change is inevitable, and that what policymakers need to concern themselves with, at least in part, is making sure that they can, to the extent that you can, that you can direct and shape change in a way that will benefit your community and your residents. There are some macro scale events that are way beyond a local official's ability to influence. But there are a lot of things where you can have a significant influence even as a local official. So if you step back and try to think about what the things are that are likely to be happening in the future, the people that saved Old Pasadena had a vision. They understood that keeping a historic neighborhood intact could be of value rather than a detriment. And creating another suburban office park was not necessarily what Pasadena should be about. They had more faith in what Pasadena was about at the core. And they felt if we were creative about how we went about it, we could turn those old buildings into a positive thing. And that's what happened. But beyond that, Pasadena, some years ago, stepped back and we asked ourselves, where are we in the regional marketplace? Cities compete like businesses do. And what can we excel at? And where do we have a leg up? And can we do some things that will really benefit our community? And so, for example, retail was not a strength. That doesn't mean we don't have any. I mean, we have retail here. But retail has never been very strong in Pasadena. And frankly, to the east and the west, Glendale has, had the Glendale Galleria and then the Caruso project. To the east, the Westfield Mall in Arcadia. We really would have difficulty competing with those. But there are areas where we had a leg up. Education is one. We've talked about the Art Center and Caltech and PCC. Education has always been a backbone of Pasadena and where we excel. What can we do to enhance the educational opportunities and to support the educational institutions that we have? And so the Art Center decided, with our encouragement, to build a whole new campus in the south end, to come off the hill and to build a whole new campus in the south end of town, in a sort of a nondescript area, close to the end of the Pasadena Freeway. Caltech has continued to excel, and we worked with them, as I referenced earlier, in terms of their master plan. Hospitality is another opportunity that we thought we really had a leg up on, because we had Old Pasadena, we have the Rose Bowl and the parade, which gives us a real brand, a strong brand. And so we really went after trying to encourage restaurants and new hotels. And we scored there. We built a number of new hotels. There are more that are temporarily, in a pause mode because of what's happened with COVID, but they'll come back. And we have more restaurants than you can shake a stick at. I mean, we have hundreds. We have over 500 restaurants. It's nuts, for a city this size. But hospitality, tourism is a place. We met with officials from the Chinese government and the tourist agencies to encourage them to include Pasadena because the Chinese tourism was growing exponentially. So you can take certain active roles in encouraging areas where the city can be successful in the marketplace and begin to guide the development in that way. The big controversy now is over multifamily housing and affordable housing. I have always been a very strong proponent of diversity in every way, demographic diversity, economic diversity, housing diversity. The future of this country is not in single-family housing. That doesn't mean that there won't be any more single-family housing, and we have neighborhoods that should look the same 50 years or 100 years from now as they do today. But on certain arterial streets and certain places, we should accommodate multifamily housing, because that in turn will allow people to have a place to live, and businesses that want to locate here have a place for their new employees to live. When I was first elected as mayor, I went to Harvard for a new mayor's forum. They've got training for everybody, including new mayors. And the Kennedy School began to talk. One of the seminars I attended for new mayors was, how to be an attractive community for millennials and beyond. And do you have the attributes that will make it an attractive place for millennials to come? And that's important because those are the employees that businesses are going to need to attract in order to staff their businesses. And Pasadena checked all the boxes, because we have multifamily housing that gives them a housing choice. We have entertainment, bars and restaurant and entertainment. We have mass transportation, which the Gold Line provided for us. And the fourth attribute, which I really hadn't thought about enough, is easy access to open space. So you can go to the north end of Lake Avenue and start climbing the mountains, right? You can climb all the way up and get yourself lost in Eaton Canyon or go wherever you want, and it's available. So I said, wow, I don't have to do anything. This is Pasadena is checking all the boxes, and we're in great shape, and it's true. So you have to be willing to take a step back, and you can't ever predict things with precision or 100% certainty. There's enough information where you can begin to understand what the important opportunities may be, and you have to have enough clarity of purpose and a willingness to stake out a position on it so that you can get there, even though certain people may not be willing to climb on board right away.
I have a question. You as an urban planner, I'd like your opinion. Did Old Pasadena turn out the way you think it should have?
Yes. Although I would say that it's continuing to evolve. Old Pasadena we put the things in place to allow it to succeed. We built the parking structures. We changed the zoning to allow for nearby high-density housing. The biggest, people don't recognize, they think of Old Pasadena as the corner of Colorado and Fair Oaks, or Raymond. But really what guarantees the future success of Old Pasadena is the largest residential project that's ever been built in the city that's, a block to the south. The 832 apartments that we planned and built and allowed, and more housing that's come after that. So there are a couple of thousand units of new housing that've been built around within walking distance of Old Pasadena that really gives that place a sense of vibrancy that's not dependent on the ebb and flow of which retailers, come and go.
Well, that was real important to get those, and those came up pretty shockingly fast, actually. I mean,
not by my standards, but the one thing I would say about city shaping, and intervention and planning, is that it always takes longer than you think. And I was very much struck by how much longer it took to accomplish some of the things that were accomplished than I had anticipated.
But I think in the time I've been here, so I came to Pasadena in 93, and there have been at least two sort of phases of Old Pasadena that I can see. Probably in the late 90s, I would love to walk down there and go to Goldstein's and get a bagel. But then that changed, and I don't think there's a Tiffany store. Maybe there is. But, these new sort of more expensive, high-end retailers came in.
Yeah, there is a Tiffany, and it's in the corner of DeLacy in Colorado. But in fact, that's where the movie theater was that actually helped jumpstart. United Artists had a small theater there.
I remember that.
That was one of the first things that made me feel we could be successful.
Well, that was across the street from Goldstein's, I think.
Yeah. But the point is that the rents got so high that only the nationals could really afford to be there. And that's why the more local retail types got pushed out. Mm-hmm. More and more restaurants came in. The city can't really control that. The city can only try to accommodate where there's a pinch point, and make sure that we're not getting in anybody's way. But putting the parking in place where there was none, and creating a redevelopment plan that allowed us to reinvest money in infrastructure, apart from the parking, but in spiffing up the sidewalks and putting in new light fixtures and new street trees and all that stuff. That was the city's part. The private market is what's responsible for actually making it happen, providing the money and the initiative and the imagination. So the city can set the table, but it's really it's private enterprise that has to make it happen.
Right.
Well, it's fascinating to sit here with someone so integral into what Old Town is today, given that
Pasadena.
Oh, I'm sorry. With Old Pasadena, that was just a test to see if you instrumental in Old Pasadena, because it has been mentioned so often in a segment of our show, and I'm interested now in hearing what are your favorite places in the San Gabriel Valley.
We're at the point now, which we call SGV 3. We'd like to know 3 of the important places or events or things in the San Gabriel Valley to you. Right. Number 1.
Well, Old Pasadena is one. No question about it. I mean, we dine there, we walk there, we hang out there. So part of it is, for me, it's sort of a busman's holiday, just sort of seeing how's the kid doing, how's he evolving. So Old Pasadena is clearly one.
And I'd have to say, most likely in the 30 or so shows we've done, that's always, that's the leading number 1, I would say.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm torn whether or not to edit that part out or leave it in, because you guys both jumped on me so strongly.
Oh, right. Yeah. Leave it in. You have to learn your lesson.
The other places for me are also very local. but are more in the sort of the natural environment. One is the lower Arroyo from Colorado Street Bridge south to the South Pasadena line to the stables. And then further north, also in the Arroyo, Cajamonga. We spend a lot of time in Cajamonga, hiking and doing the trails in that area. So the Arroyo, what really are the most unique parts of Pasadena, and for me the San Gabriel Valley, are all pretty close together in Old Pasadena and the two parts of the Arroyo that I really treasure.
That's where is there like archery and horseback riding down there?
Well, one of my great efforts as mayor was to help create a new conservancy, a new group that would really sponsor things in the Arroyo. And the Arroyo in Pasadena is not only our most important natural feature, biggest open space and most important natural environmental place, but has something for everybody. One of the things that I learned in the early part of that effort is that people see the Arroyo through the prism of how they use it. So you mentioned it has archery, it has a casting pond for people who fly fish, it has the Rose Bowl, of course, for people who like to watch football and go to concerts, and the flea market, once a month. It has bicycling, it has hiking, it has baseball, it has virtually any open space activity that you can think of. And it has natural trails, golf. I left out 36 holes of golf.
Well, and you left out the swimming
and the kids place, kids space.
And kids space. Yeah.
I mean, you can't begin to list all the stuff. And so people, depending on how they use the Arroyo, they think of it in a different way. What it is really is a big natural drainage course. It carries the water down from the San Gabriel Mountains past Devil's Gate Dam, and then down through the concrete channel, mostly, all the way then further south to South Pasadena and beyond. But it's a remarkable place, and my fear is that it's being loved to death, because so many people used it, and they only used it, and they only saw it in one dimension. The archers saw it as an archery range, and the hikers saw it as a hiking trail. Sometimes they conflict. The walkers, the dog walkers in the lower Arroyo were always afraid of the archers being so close by with potentially lethal equipment. I mean, it's an endless tug of war. But the answer is that if you were creating an urban open space someplace as a designer, and you began to list the kinds of activities you would want to put in a place, you'd be hard-pressed to have a bigger list than what exists in the Arroyo Seco. And so that's a tremendous asset for the city and something that completely captured me.
So I wasn't clear. Is that 1, 2, and 3 was the upper and lower, your second and third, or
2
do you
and
have
3.
a third?
Yeah, that was 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that and giving some insight into your perspective on the San Gabriel Valley and specifically Pasadena. What is next for you, and what are you working on next? What would you like to share with our listeners?
Well, I ask that question every day, and right now I'm sort of letting the dust settle. We were engaged in a very vigorous campaign, unsuccessfully, and I really went from being the mayor, trying to govern in the midst of the pandemic challenge. And running for office, and then suddenly it was done. And so I have been working on some public service thing quietly, out of view. I'm not looking for another full-time job. That's done for me. The decompression has been a little unsettling in some ways, but it's turned out that Maria and I still like each other a lot. And if the world settles down a little bit, we'll go back to traveling, which is our one great indulgence. We've always tried to make 2 international trips a year. We've traveled very widely around the world. And I'd like to resume that, although it doesn't doesn't look like that'll happen until 2022. But we'll resume traveling, but I'm not going to quit. The Princeton instilled spirit of public service is still going to be a large part of my life, but probably in less visible ways. I've been approached by a couple of organizations to join their boards. I'm not in a rush to make that decision just yet. I'm going to just let things settle down a little bit. I also have to say that I enjoy teaching a lot. I taught at USC in the Saul Price School on a graduate level for a couple of years. I had to give that up because the mayor gig was just too demanding. But I'm not really anxious to get into a full-time thing. But I do have an idea about how I could be. I can get a toe back into education without having to commit to grading papers and looking at final exams. So we're blessed with good health and all this family that you've seen a picture of. And at this point in my life, I'm sort of playing with the house's money, and I really want to continue to enjoy myself, but to be useful if I can be, and to continue to contribute to Pasadena. Pasadena has been so good to our family, has been so welcoming, and has been such a great part of our lives since 1982 that I'm certainly not going to withdraw from all things Pasadena just because I lost an election.
Wonderful. Well, one final question, being that you're from New York, the Brooklyn Dodgers or New York Yankees?
Oh, what a question. What a terrible question.
I'm trying to just instigate here because
I can't imagine. I have a pantheon, and of course the Yankees are in that pantheon. So
it's the hated Yankees.
Yeah, right.
There's always that.
I saw a cartoon just the other day, and it was New York Yankees. Yankees is short for Yankees suck.
Yeah, well, that was more like Barry Bonds, but But the point is that we, growing up in elementary school was the period. The Boys of Summer and all that business.
Oh, yeah, right.
So Maria can remember having the priest tell them to pray for Gil Hodges, all that stuff.
Oh, wow.
And we saw, my dad took me to see Jackie Robinson. I saw Jackie Robinson. He's not a mythological figure for me. He's a guy that I saw play. So we go to Dodger games every year. I'll be delighted when we can get back to Dodger Stadium. It's the only sport that I really care about. And so it'll be great to be able to see them in person again.
But Ebbets Field must be just a special place for you.
Ebbets Field was a unique experience.
Yeah.
And when we lived in Massachusetts, I would take my son to Fenway in Boston, which is not the same, but at least was sort of the same scale and ambiance, I would call it, before they redid it. Now it's been prettied up. But so I had an opportunity to revisit that, on a similar scale in Boston during our Massachusetts years. But
how many fans did Ebbets hold? In the
low
30s, right?
Yeah, low 30s.
Right.
Yeah, very, very different experience.
Very intimate,
And it's interesting. I only learned in later years that the O'Malleys were really not the bad guys in that, in moving them out of Brooklyn. That really it was Robert Moses.
Oh, well, Robert Moses is blamed for everything.
But it's really true. And
but
Robert
he
Moses,
have been, right?
The O'Malleys wanted to build a domed stadium.
Oh, really?
In downtown Brooklyn, where the Brooklyn Nets play now.
Oh, really?
And Moses told them that they had to go to Flushing Meadow. And O'Malley said, not going to do it, and he moved them
and
to...
that's where they built Shea Stadium then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which had nowhere near the charm of a downtown Brooklyn Ebbets Field type thing. Yeah, right.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on our show and for sharing all this with us. We really appreciate it, and I hope that the listeners also appreciate this insight from someone so involved in a big part of what is the San Gabriel Valley. So
yeah, thank you very much for sharing all that.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the SGV Master Key. You can find the full back catalog catalog of the SGV Master Key at sgvmasterkey.com and wherever you get your podcasts. This show was produced and edited by Russell Mono and Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. Thanks again for listening or watching. We'll see you again real soon in the next episode.
Nice mother. No, kind mother.